Hello everybody, welcome to Birmingham, although this is actually Solihull. I don't mean to be incredibly parochial, but whilst it's called Birmingham Airport, it is actually in Solihull, not that I hold that against it. So it's a pleasure to be here in Birmingham. It's also, a pleasure for me to follow Patrick, because very rarely in my line of work do people sound like me, and so it is a pleasure to hear a Midlands accent ringing out in a room like this. The first thing I want to say is, first and foremost, I was raised by teachers. Not something I have always thought was the best thing when I was a kid. My father's ability to give a hard stare is second to absolutely none, and stun us all into complete and utter abject silence. But not only was I raised by teachers, but my feminism largely comes from the teachers who taught me when I was a kid in the 1980s, where similar battles to the ones that we feel now seemed so prominent, where issues in schools where teachers were having to not just be teachers and teach children not just the basics of life and how to be a great human being, but also acting as social workers, acting as housing officers, acting as, I'm afraid to say, literally providing housing in my constituency in some cases. A head teacher from my constituency rang me yesterday and said to me that a family where the youngest child goes to his school had been made homeless through domestic abuse and had been placed in a hotel where there was drug running and prostitution going on in the hotel on the one night that they had been placed there. And then they were being sent to rugby from Birmingham. So how are you meant to get your children to school? And day in, day out at the moment, I am seeing teachers being the ones who turn up to my surgeries, who turn up to tell me, to beg for me to help. And this particular head teacher, he came across my radar initially because he was literally housing a family in the school hall overnight because they were completely homeless and being sent miles and miles away. Without him being able to get to work or the children being able to get to school. I'm afraid to say that this is not an uncommon thing. And when I was a kid in the 1980s, I had two amazing teachers called Mrs. Furman and Mrs. Randall, and they spied in me a sort of firebrand attitude from the age of about 4 and really, really leaned into making me speak up and ask for things that I wanted. So I owe a lot of my feminism to the teachers who taught me. I just want to touch on a point that was made here in Birmingham over the last week. There's been some shit points made in Birmingham by some shit people. It's what my husband says, if you ever want to clap, if in doubt, swear. One of the new ministers in the Department for Education, you may remember her from this. She last week, she stood on a platform and very proudly said in Birmingham city centre that she was not a feminist. She was a meritocratist, which is not even a word, but okay, whatevs. She believed in meritocracy, not feminism. I cannot begin to express how stupid a statement this is from somebody who is currently in charge of our parts of our education system. Because if you believe in meritocracy and you believe that meritocracy delivers the best into our society, then you must believe that black women are brilliant at cleaning and white men are brilliant at practicing the law just naturally from birth. This is totally and utterly ridiculous. And the idea that somebody who would be in charge of the progression of the children in my constituency and the livelihoods of the teachers in my constituency thinks that there is no barrier other than our abilities is absolutely not fit to govern. There are so many barriers, especially for women. I mean, I think it's brave of somebody saying something quite so stupid to stick up for meritocracy, but there we go. There are so many barriers for women in the workplace, and I was asked to talk about women's rights and sexual harassment. I mean, the TUC found in a survey, which they have repeated a number of times, that the biggest threat of insecurity and safety, and the biggest reason why women leave their workplaces is because of the feelings of not being safe because of sexual harassment in the workplace. So this is not a small thing. I was on a committee of the Women and Equalities Select Committee where we looked into sexual harassment in the workplace. And we made a load of recommendations that the government have gone on to completely and utterly ignore, quelle surprise. But one of the things that we found was that health and safety in the workplace currently, in both legislation and in the structures and systems that we have in place to deal with it, so the Health and Safety Executive, currently doesn't take account of sexual harassment. So I sat in front of a man from the Health and Safety Executive who came to give evidence to our committee, and I said, can I ask what you do about advising on health and safety in the workplace with regard to sexual harassment? To which they said, that is not our responsibility. Like, okay, well, it's the biggest issue for women, so it should be. But okay, you know, I'm willing to take you on a journey. And I said, okay, so do you know what the biggest killer of women at work? So obviously, I think that the Health and Safety Executive are responsible for the things that put our lives in danger at work. So, you know, I remember literally getting trained on how to carry a cup of tea in between from one office to another. Like, rightly so, like, you know, that's absolutely right, that I should be being careful about those sorts of things. Well, and I understand that, you know, that accidents in the workplace that cause people a threat to people's life and limb, very, very important, core business of the Health and Safety Executive. So I asked if he knew how most women had died in their workplaces in the previous years. He didn't. And the answer is that they were summarily executed by their partners. I cited 3 different cases from the previous year where their ex-partner or current partner had walked into a woman's workplace and killed her. But apparently, that's not the responsibility of the Health and Safety Executive. So I was able to ask him, so I'm right in thinking that it's your job if I'm hit by a van at work, but not if I'm hit by a man. And he said yes. And that is the situation that we find ourselves in frequently, where sexual harassment in the workplace is not considered to be part of, it's considered to be hived over away in the sort of equalities interest basket, rather than a core and fundamental issue that stops people feeling safe in their workplaces. And being able to provide, certainly in the case of teachers, a safe and secure workplace and learning environment for their students. I don't need to tell the people in this room of the number of different scandals over the last few years with regards to sexual harassment in schools, universities and learning environments for young women. In many cases, patchy and unhelpful regulation offered to schools, very complete and utter lack of guidance in many circumstances. The only piece of guidance that was ever put in place for a school to know how to deal with an issue of sexual violence between peers in a classroom was brought about not because the government noticed there was an issue, even though survey after survey showed that there was a problem with sexual harassment for our young women in their learning environments. That not because of that, even though the government well and truly knew that, but it's because a family took the then Secretary of State, Justine Greening, to court after their daughter was raped by a classmate and put it in the same class with him. And there was no government guidance for schools in how to manage this. It is constantly a mainstream issue that half of the population is dealing with on, whether it's a near daily basis. I don't wish to overblow the idea, but I think that most of the women in this room don't recognise the amount of free labour that we give out in offering security to ourselves and to other women around us. When Sarah Everard was murdered, and everybody was coming on the television and everybody was reflecting on the amount that we all do to try and keep ourselves safe. The holding the keys in your hand, my friends literally watch me. They tag my phone and watch me as I walk home. We ring each other. We make sure that we stick together. That when we get dressed, we think about how we're going to be experienced by the world in front of us. And I was talking to my husband about this, who was like, yep, never done any of that. Never once done any of that. Never ever once done the micromanagement, free labour of making sure that I am safe at all times because the state has failed to do that work for me. And he said to me, in the amount of time in your life, since I was probably about 7, that I have been doing that. He said, if you took back all that time of all those moments where you thought about how you had to keep yourself safe, that free safety work that you were doing in order to keep yourself safe from somebody else, you could have made a feature-length stop-frame animation film in that time. He was like, think of the tapestry you could have sewn. Think of the amazing things that you would have been able to offer the world. Think of the opuses that have not been written. Think of the hours of time that we have wasted trying to ensure that we feel safe, just like on a most basic level. It is a fundamental part of a woman's experience, both in the workplace, on the street, in their homes, that we are expected to do this work constantly, and it is tiring, and we create and work in spaces that makes young women have to continue with this, having to continue. So when people say to me, well, what would you say to young women then? What would you say to young girls if they were going out and about? Like, I've got no choice but to tell them to do exactly what I've done all my life, because there is no alternative. There is no alternative to saying, well, you are going to have to constantly think about your own safety, because the state won't, essentially. And this is the idea that sexual harassment in the workplace is just like a niche issue and isn't a fundamental part that is driving everybody in the way that they can succeed. Whether it's sexism, whether it's the small microaggressions, whether it's watching people be promoted above you regardless of your meritocracy, all of these things are things that we have to constantly battle with and constantly be trying to second guess. I have to say there is some hope on the horizon, and that hope shockingly has come in the form of Liz Truss, because I always said that the day that we had somebody totally mediocre who was able to get to the position, a woman who was totally mediocre, who could get to the highest position in the country and wouldn't have had to have been exceptional to get there, then we'd have true equality, and she has provided that for us. She's totally ruined all my patter about how women have to be 10 times better and black women 20 times better. She has totally ruined all of it by being really shit and getting to the top. So I'm going to have to update the old the speaking routine. But the experience of women in the workplace needs to be considerably more mainstreamed. It is not a women's issue to be concerned about childcare. It is not a women's issue to be concerned about sexual harassment. It is not a women's issue to be concerned about sexism. It should be a mainstream issue that if we didn't have, think of the productivity. If Liz Truss wants me to be more productive, it would be cracking if I didn't have to do all this free labour. It would be cracking if I didn't have to constantly work to keep myself safe, constantly fight and battle to be seen as equal. I could have as my husband said, made a Wallace and Gromit film and moved past. That's the level of detail that I have taken in my life to try and overcome the idea that there is a meritocracy that we can live up to. It is for the birds. It is dangerous when it is coming out of our Department of Education. The whole point of the Department for Education in our country should be in tackling the idea that it's only your skills that will help you. It should be entirely about breaking down every single barrier for every single child across our country, and it shouldn't sit idly by while teachers have to not just not be doing more for less, but they are fundamentally at the moment, and I can't help but think that in a lot of cases this is because they are women and we are so used to giving away our labour force so free, that you are doing the job that the state has failed to do in cases of children's social care, in cases of safeguarding, in cases of housing. It is fundamentally unacceptable that we continue to offer this free labour in propping up failures of the last 12 years. But what's the alternative? The alternative is to throw children at the wall and leave families and communities without the help that they might need. And thankfully, we're considerably better than them and wouldn't do it. But there has to be demands made that makes it so it doesn't just fall to our universal services to mop up what has been a total degradation of services and to do the free labour of trying to convince people who believe in meritocracy. Thank you very much. Do you want me to sit down or stand up?
Whichever you're more comfortable with.
I don't mind standing now.
Yeah, I'll stand up, yeah. And
my son is calling me, almost certainly, to be like, where are you? I haven't got the house key.
Absolutely, well, you feel your pain there. Absolutely fantastic speech there, Joe. And as you said, in your bio, plain speaking, that's what we like. Absolutely fantastic. But also, without any notes. Absolutely, from the heart, from the head, fantastic. And keeping to time.
It's not my first rodeo.
And keeping to time. I mean, when I go on, I waffle on. Absolutely fantastic. Okay, so we have got time for some questions. If there's anybody's got a question, if we can get the mics to you, that would be brilliant.
Quite
some
hard
hands
to see
up here.
with all the lights.
Who's the first one with the mic? And don't forget to say who you are. Number 4 over there is calling.
Hiya, I'm Zara Lomax, I'm from Warrington Association. So I was told a few years ago by a student in front of a class full of boys, she's got massive tits here. No doy. But he was punished by just getting a detention and moving classes to a boys' class. Now, this is, to a male teacher's class, sorry. This has happened to a colleague in the school that I'm at, and they've dealt with it much better. Yeah. But it seems in every area it is a lottery of how we are educating these boys to behave in a certain way. Because if they can do it to members of staff, they're going to do it to their peers. Yeah. How do we handle this?
Look, it's a really, really good question, and it's the same as when I stand in front of nurses' unions, and there is a difference when I'm talking. So, the general principle in sexual harassment is people don't grope up. Like, you grope someone who you can fire, not someone who can fire you, because it's about power and control. However, when we're talking about public services, when we're talking about children behaving in a certain way or patients behaving in a certain way, there does have to be a different understanding of what needs to be done. I'm the mother of 2 teenage sons, and so I'm only ever mindful of what needs to be available in my point of view, and certainly what the Labour Party policy platform on men's violence against women and girls will work to, is a very clear set of lines about how it has to be dealt with and for that to be monitored in some manner. But also, there's no point, you don't necessarily want that kid to be expelled and go into a PRU or whatever the situation is. But in about 4 places in our country, there is sexually harmful behaviours programmes for young men showing signs of exactly what you're talking about. But that's 4 places in our country, 4. And schools are now, basically, so people like me try to do the good work of saying that all schools have to provide compulsory sex and relationship education. And that was passed, and I'll be forever grateful for that, although here in Birmingham you may remember caused some contention, but we've got over that bump now. But the problem is that, and what we always said all the way through, was that without the proper resources for schools to bring in expert people to deal with boys with sexually harmful behaviours, for example, and not damn them to it. Because it's not even just that I want them punished. I want them not to perpetrate that in their future. It is just as much about saving victims of the future as well as saving the life of criminality of that individual. But that just simply isn't available. And what we've seen is the terrible, weak resources. And I was with a teacher yesterday at an event I was at in Birmingham, and like the cost of energy on schools and all these costs coming in at the same time, as if they're going to be able to employ specialists to come in and do the proper sexually harmful behaviours that's needed with boys in school. It's just for the birds. When I was at school, we had like police officers, and his name was PC Treasure, which I always liked. He was a treasure, lovely fella. And we had children's psychologists who worked out of our schools. Like, all of the stuff that used to sort of exist to try and look at some of this has been degraded. And that's really, really problematic. But yeah, look, I think that there needs to be robust guidelines in dealing with this thing. But I also then think there need to be actual interventions that are available to schools. And that has to. If they genuinely say that they care about men's violence against women, why wouldn't they fund that?
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to number 1 over there.
Hi, I'm Dawn Andrew from Lincoln. A little bit gushing. You actually spoke at a women's conference that I held over Zoom just after the Sarah Everard event. So I want to say thank you. You were brilliant then and you're brilliant now. And it's just really nice to see somebody that can kind of very eloquently and funnily voice what we're all probably feeling. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I often think it's hard to be an opposition politician because your whole job is just whinging. And so the Labour Party can sometimes feel, and has, although not so much at the moment, but has sometimes felt to me in opposition, it's like we need to cheer up a bit. And, you know, I spend my entire time talking about the worst possible things in the world, and I think that trying to do it with a bit of humour often means it carries to the people who don't always agree with you slightly better. So thank you, that's very kind.
Never apologise for being gushing.
Yeah,
it is
never.
about
Gush
being
away,
positive to sisters. Should never be apologetic. We should always be calling out what we see as with our sisters and brothers, but particularly with our sisters, to say, you know, well done, job well done. That was great. I really liked it. So I'm going to go over to this side because I've had some questions over there. Number 2, and then I'm going to come to number 3 and then call it a day. Number 2.
Hi, Jess.
My name's silhouetted. It's like you're on Crime Watch to me.
These lights on the side are very bright.
I'm Irene. I'm from Birmingham.
Yay!
I drive past your office every day on the way to work, and I am a huge fan.
It's not subtle, is it, my office?
It's not, no. I wouldn't expect any less, Jess. But I just wanted to say, first of all, thank you for continuing to call out issues of sexual harassment and a lot of the issues that we face in work. I'm a survivor of microaggressions, barriers in the workplace, sexual harassment as well. And I did actually make a complaint about the sexual harassment that I experienced. and it wasn't really dealt with properly. That person is still in the workplace. I don't work there anymore. They moved that person to another school site. They then moved me to that school site, and there was a lot of issues around that, and it just was not taken seriously. And I just kind of felt alone, and I didn't really feel like I could push to get it dealt with, because then my job might be at risk. And
Of course.
you know, so it's really, really frustrating. It's this, you try to do the right thing in calling it out, and then you're not supported in doing that. And the outcome was just really disappointing for me. And then I'm also seeing children in my new school, boys in particular, the way that they behave towards girls. It's disgusting, and I call out their behaviour, and I talk to them about what sexual harassment is and what they've done and why it is sexual harassment, and they are so confused. They have no idea. So I just feel like there's so much more that needs to be done in our schools to educate our young boys in particular about what their behaviour is and the impact that it has. And I don't want the onus to be on girls to keep protecting themselves. Girls, this is what you need to do in order to make sure that you're not making yourself a victim. I really feel like we need to start calling out behaviours. We need to start educating boys in particular. And I'm just really pleased that you're, you know, championing this. And I hope that, you know, I really want to do more. And I just, first of all, also, can I get a selfie with you?
Yeah, you can.
And and when we do that, I'd really like to see if there's anything you can suggest as to
just
what
pop
I
into
can
my
do.
office. I mean, you're driving past all the time.
Yes, I would, but every time I drive past, it's closed because I finish school late and I start early in the morning.
I want to speak to your union.
I know. Patrick? I might do, actually. Patrick, I might need to have a chat with you as well. I can get a selfie. But yeah, I'd love to hear more on what I could do in my school to tackle the issue.
Look, the truth of the matter is these things do improve when there is. I wish that there was a genuine. The structural thing that needs to change. We're 25, 30 years away from sort of patriarchal norms, hopefully being educated out, but we're not there. But you see, actually, where a school or a business has a real driving force, like most things, it relies on personnel, it relies on somebody being able to sort of rally other people to making this a big and central issue. There's a number of brilliant schools that are worth looking at with regard to the sort of attitude stuff. There's, I think it's Dagenham High School, or it's in Dagenham somewhere, I can dig it out and find it, and some of the Manchester schools where taking a whole school approach to sexual harassment and violence has been really, really, really successful. And they're always, I know them because they're the ones who get put on the telly with me every time there's some dreadful case I've got to go and comment on. There's this fella from Dagenham's always like, oh, hello, Jess. But the truth of the matter is when things aren't dealt with properly in our workplaces and people feel unsupported, that it acts as the greatest barrier and silencing effects. Like, nobody else will come forward in the future because, you know, they will know that it's rubbish and there's no point. And so, you know, like trying to make it so that it is a core issue that that both management and senior leadership teams take on board is really, 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 really important. And it is always just driven by individuals, I'm afraid to say, because the structures aren't in place currently, but they need to be. But there are lots of examples of how to do it well that I can make sure, if you email me, I can make sure that you have them. And do pop in any time to the office. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I did say we'd take another question from the floor, but I apologise
Yes,
to Claire because I am infringing on your time. But I have one online that I want to take. And this is saying, it's from Krista, and she's zooming in with us. Hello, Krista. And she says, with delays in processing sexual assault crimes in courts, how can we support female colleagues and pupil victims while they are awaiting the court process?
It's an amazingly apt question. I'm currently dealing with a young woman. She was 13 when she came forward to the police about multiple sexual abuses that she had suffered. And also another member of her family came forward about the same perpetrator at the same time. She's now 21 and still hasn't seen the inside of a courtroom. And the only thing that she dropped out of school unsurprisingly. The only thing that I can do to try and hold her in the system is I meet with her every single week. I am grateful that she is my constituent, because it's, you know, it's sort of, there must be millions of thousands of cases similar across the country. It is very, very, very difficult. What I think that my best advice to anyone supporting somebody who has suffered sexual violence and abuse, or living in a domestic abuse situation or sexual exploitation, is that the thing that they have lost is control. It's always about power and control, and the thing that they have lost and had removed from them is control. And to try wherever possible, and I understand that in a teacher-pupil relationship this might be, you know, that there are obviously boundaries that have to be kept, is to try and make them feel in control of the situation, even if they are not. Is to try and support them to say, okay, well, this week to next week, what is it you think that we can do that will make you feel better, and allow them to come up with it. Also, don't be frightened of, like, people are worried that if somebody comes forward to them and discloses something as a survivor, that they will immediately have to leap to action. Like, most survivors and victims don't want you to be like, right, I'm going to ring the police straight away. Like, this is like immediately, and I understand that there's a safeguarding imperative that you have to deal with children, but it's okay just to listen and act as a believing witness. That's all most people want. They want you to bear witness and be led by them in how they want to deal with it, within obviously all the safeguarding rules. So the best way is to try and allow any victim to lead any of the interactions. And if they don't turn up to them and they don't want to engage, then, you know, give it time, don't force it, because I think that people misunderstand that actually the thing that is the problem is control, and they feel out of control. And so trying to do anything to put even just small things like them controlling what they eat is often how it becomes for women in traumatic situations. Like, empower them to feel controlled about other things is what I would say.
Thank you very much for that, Jess, and thank you for this session.